A few minutes after the last chimes of midnight faded into the quiet hum of his apartment, Julian Leaf's phone screen flared with her name. He wasn't supposed to be awake. Ria Novell didn't know the rhythmic drip of the leaky faucet he'd been meaning to fix was the only sound that quelled the relentless chatter of his anxious thoughts when she was gone. She also didn't know he had just wrestled down a barrage of insecurities, desperately convincing himself she was loyal, that she was exactly where she'd said she'd be. He didn't answer out of suspicion. He answered because he missed her. Ria was supposedly at a corporate retreat in Aspen, a high-altitude, mindfulness leadership seminar complete with après-ski networking and high-altitude yoga. The kind of event that offered a morally superior reason for her to escape their life together. So, when the video call came in, Julian, 42, a tall, lean man with tired but kind eyes often hidden behind spectacles, wiped the sleep from his face and offered a weak, hopeful smile. What if everything you believed was about to shatter? The moment the camera connected, his bones locked up. He saw dim, blue ambient lighting, heard a low, throbbing beat of music, and then a man's casual chuckle. Her phone was propped against something. He could see a sleek, minimalist bed, a reflective art piece, and a segment of a wall adorned with abstract prints. This was no hotel, not unless hotels came furnished with a custom-built bookshelf overflowing with philosophy and travel guides. Julian sat bolt upright, his breath snagged in his throat. Ria, 38, with her sleek, sharp features and deep auburn hair cut into a severe bob, entered the frame. She wore a silk camisole he didn't recognize, her hair artfully messy, a smudge of dark lipstick on her chin. She didn't see the camera. She was laughing, a tinkling, almost mocking sound, with the man just off-screen. Then she uttered words that branded themselves onto his soul. He actually believes I'm bonding with the board. Bless his predictable heart. A high-pitched ringing filled Julian's ears. Ria glided past the screen again. Then the man, Garth, appeared. He was late 30s, broad-shouldered, with a rugged, sun-kissed look and an almost arrogant smirk. He wore only a silk robe, tied loosely at the waist. He brushed a hand possessively down Ria's back, murmuring something Julian couldn't decipher, something that made her laugh again. That wild, untamed laugh he hadn't heard from her in months. And then she turned, snatched the phone, and froze. Their eyes met, digitally, across a chasm that had just opened beneath them. Accidentally, she dropped the device. The screen spun, hit the floor. Black. Call ended. For what felt like an eternity, Julian sat motionless, the phone a dead weight in his hand, not blinking, not moving, not breathing. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He was mortified, profoundly humiliated. He wasn't just part of her lie. He was the pathetic punchline of it. This is what it feels like to be erased from your own story. He did what he hadn't done in 5 years. He stood, opened the antique armoire, and started packing. He didn't even realize he was doing it until the zipper of his vintage leather duffel snagged on the lining. His hands moved with a purpose that had not yet reached his stunned brain. Half his meticulously organized clothes went into the duffel. Shirts he hadn't touched in a year, jeans he never truly liked, a cashmere sweater that still carried the faint scent of her expensive perfume. He stood there, gazing down at the haphazard pile, feeling more like a transient guest in his own life than a man who'd faithfully paid the rent on it for years. He didn't know where he was going, but staying felt like volunteering for another brutal joke. He didn't leave immediately. That's the part that still gnawed at him. He just sank onto the edge of the bed, his duffel at his feet, a sad silhouette of a man trying to comprehend the explosion that had just decimated his world. He replayed the call in his head so many times that her cruel words, "Poor guy," echoed even when his eyes were tightly shut. Not Julian, not his husband, just a pitiable footnote in her weekend escapade. He kept checking his phone, half hoping she'd text, call, perhaps even offer a fabricated apology. But nothing came, just silence. The same cold, heavy silence that had been stealthily building in their marriage for years, now made real, tangible, a weapon pointed directly at his heart. By 2 a.m., he was still fully dressed, still pacing the worn Persian rug, still trying to talk himself out of pretending it didn't happen. That's when he made the irreversible mistake. He opened her sleek, silver laptop. He knew it was wrong. He knew what kind of man that made him. But he needed answers. He was done waiting for her to hand them to him. wrapped in more meticulously crafted lies. The moment he clicked on her messages, his stomach churned violently. There was no corporate retreat, no leadership summit, no pretense of professional development. Just hotel confirmations. Cryptocurrency transfers for consultation fees, followed by playful emojis. And a long, unread chat log with someone named the Phoenix, Garth, filled with words he never imagined he'd read from the woman who had cried tears of joy during their wedding vows. They talked about him like he was a naive, slightly pathetic child, a joke, a man too docile to ever question her, even if he walked in on the mid-act. They derided his unwavering devotion, mocking how he always said, "I just want to make you happy," as if his earnest attempt to love her made him utterly pathetic. The chat log ended with her saying, "One more weekend, and I'll have enough courage to leave. He's too docile to ever question me." And she was right. He wasn't going to fight. He was going to vanish. He grabbed his duffel, slipped on his worn leather boots, and walked out of the apartment as quietly as he could. Not out of consideration, but because he refused to give her the satisfaction of a dramatic, angry exit. No note, no confrontation, no furious texts, just an empty space where her poor guy used to be. And yet, still, a foolish part of him yearned for her to call, to chase him, to realize the profound, quiet love she had so carelessly discarded. But she didn't. And maybe that, he realized, was the answer he'd been terrified of all along. By sunrise, he was halfway to nowhere, driving towards the distant glow of the eastern horizon. He hadn't even punched a destination into his GPS. He just drove, somewhere between the city lights fading in his rearview mirror and the morning fog rolling in like a silent tide. He realized he hadn't uttered a single word in hours. Not out loud, not to himself, not even in his head. It was as if his brain had shut down, gone into survival mode, buffering reality just long enough for him to remain upright. That silence wasn't peace. It was numbness. And numbness, Julian was learning, was its own unique agony. Eventually, he pulled off the highway into a forgotten roadside inn with a sign that promised solitude and comfort, and delivered only cracked paint and a flickering neon vacancy sign that buzzed like a tired cicada. He hadn't planned on staying, but his body, heavy with exhaustion, disagreed. He booked a room, paid cash, and didn't even bother to ask how many nights. He just needed one night to decide if he still had a future that included him in it. He sat on the bed, staring at the fissured plaster ceiling while the muted murmur of an old documentary about lost empires droned on the television. He kept thinking about how he was the one caught in a storm, but there had been no warnings, no radar images. Just a woman who claimed to love him while she meticulously planned her escape with someone else. Garth. God. Even his name sounded like a sneer. Julian reached for his phone more times than he could count. Each time convinced she'd called, she'd realized, she'd apologized. But there was nothing. No missed calls, no texts, not even a passive-aggressive, "Where are you?" Nothing. She wasn't looking for him. That realization, sharp and cold, hurt worse than the initial betrayal. Still, out of a stubborn, aching habit, he opened their shared digital photo album, hating himself for doing it. There they were, at a summer festival in Tuscany, him holding her hand while she laughed at something he'd said. He remembered that day vividly. He believed they were healing. He thought she meant it when she whispered, "This feels like us again." But now, he wondered if Garth had taken that picture for them, standing just off frame, a silent, unseen architect of her world. He hated how much he still loved her, and he hated how little she seemed to care. Then, the voicemail came. A single notification from Mr. Henderson from Unit 3B, his downstairs neighbor. "Hey, Julian. I wasn't going to say anything, but I saw your wife pull up around 1 a.m. last night. She wasn't alone. Looked like the same sleek, expensive car from Tuesday night. Thought maybe you were out of town, but figured you should know." That was it. Nothing theatrical. Just stark confirmation that while he was packing his life into a duffel bag, she was busy laughing in the arms of a man who didn't have to try. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. But he did something worse. He started blaming himself. Maybe he was too accommodating, too predictable, too dull. Maybe she needed more than he could give. But even in that spiraling pit of self-pity, a quiet, defiant part of him knew. He didn't ruin this. He didn't lie. He didn't cheat. He didn't mock someone who loved him. She did. So why did he still crave her acknowledgement, her remorse? ready to uncover the surprising paradox of betrayal. He was halfway through a stale vending machine croissant when his phone finally lit up with her name. Not a call, just a text. One word. No punctuation, no emotion. Silence. He stared at it like it was written in a language he no longer understood. After all those years, after the vows, the holidays, the nights he'd stayed awake, cradling her, while she cried over things he didn't comprehend. This was it. A one-word text, sent 12 hours too late. He didn't reply. Not because he wanted to be mysterious or dramatic, but because there was genuinely nothing left to say that she hadn't already erased the night before with her body, her mouth, and that hotel room she swore didn't exist. An hour later, she called. For reasons he still couldn't justify, he answered. "Julian," she said, her voice flat, like she was reading his name off a grocery list. "Where did you go?" He didn't respond. She sighed, a sound of pure annoyance, as if he were the one who had disrupted their weekend plans. "I came home, and your things were gone. You didn't even leave a note." Still, he remained silent. He wanted her to talk. Not to him, for he no longer deserved her honesty, but to herself. He wanted to see if she had the courage to tell the truth out loud. Spoiler, she didn't. "Are you seriously playing the silent treatment game, Julian?" she asked, the word Julian hitting him like a slap. "I think we need to talk about this like adults. You can't just run away when things get hard." That's when something inside him finally snapped. He laughed. He actually laughed. Not because anything was funny. Nothing about this was funny, but because the irony was too thick, too absurd to ignore. He ran away. She lied. She cheated. She laughed with another man while calling him pathetic. And now she was lecturing him about communication. "You don't get to play the victim, Rhea," he said quietly, his voice shaking more than he wanted it to. "You don't get to pretend you're the one who's hurt." She paused, caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" He could almost hear her rehearsing excuses in her head. She wasn't ready for the truth to show up uninvited. "Your phone called me last night, Rhea," he said. "Accidentally. Right as you were performing your grand charade in someone else's bed." Silence. Then a sharp exhale, like she'd been punched. "That wasn't what it looked like," she said, her voice smaller now, fragile. "Then tell me what it was." Another pause, longer this time. "He's just someone I talked to. I was drunk. I didn't mean for you to see that." There it was. Not, "I didn't do it." Not, "I'm sorry." Just, "I didn't mean for you to catch me." He ended the call. Not out of anger, not to hurt her, but because he finally understood that everything he'd been holding on to, the hope, the love, the second chances, had only ever belonged to him. She'd let go a long time ago. He just hadn't noticed. By the next morning, the motel room felt smaller. The air felt heavier. He hadn't slept, just stared at the fissured ceiling like it owed him answers. His thoughts looped relentlessly, and every time he tried to reason through what happened, he kept coming back to the same stupid question. Had his perception been so willfully blind, his heart so stubbornly optimistic? And the worst part was, he already knew the answer. He hadn't missed the signs. He'd ignored them. He wanted so badly for her to be who she used to be that he kept loving a version of her that no longer existed. At 9:13 a.m., she texted again, a deluge of calculated remorse this time. She claimed she was confused, that she never meant to hurt him, that Garth was just a mistake, and that what we had was still worth fighting for. Julian almost laughed out loud, not because he found it funny, but because if she thought now was the time to start fighting for us, then she had never truly known him at all. She wrote that he was being punitive, that leaving like he did was unfair to both of them, that she deserved the chance to explain. But she had already explained, just not in words, in actions, and he had seen it all through that accidental call. Every truth her lips wouldn't say, captured in a few unforgivable seconds. He didn't answer her message. Instead, he drove out of town again. He found a loft apartment a few cities over, above a rare book emporium that smelled of aged paper and forgotten tales. It wasn't much, but it didn't have her in it, and that was enough for now. He didn't tell anyone where he went. Not friends, not family, not even his boss. He needed to sit in the silence and remember what it felt like to be alone. Not ignored, not pitted, just alone without pretending everything was okay. That night, he scrolled through her social media. Everything was still polished, curated. A masterclass in digital fabrication. She even posted a sepia-toned image from their anniversary cruise last spring, captioned, "Cherished Memories." So much gratitude. Read hard. He stared at that heart emoji like it was a grenade. It wasn't for him. It was for the people watching, her mother, her friends, their coworkers. To them, they were still perfect, solid, lovable. He was the only one who knew the truth. And he started to wonder, should he change that? But here's the thing. He didn't want revenge. He didn't want to ruin her life or expose her in front of the people who thought she walked on water. Because doing that would mean he still cared how people saw them. And he didn't. Not anymore. The only thing he wanted was to stop being the fool in a story she got to rewrite. So he let her lie one last time. Let her pretend she was the one left behind. Let her post pictures like he was still in the frame. And he didn't comment, didn't like, didn't text. He disappeared from her version of events. And that was the loudest thing he had ever done. He found it in a hidden compartment of his old oak desk, tucked beneath a stack of old journals. A small, unassuming cardboard box, taped across the middle and marked with a faded sticky note that read, RN Private. Keep out. Her handwriting, neat, careful, probably scribbled during one of those rare bursts of guilt. He realized now that she was a master of compartmentalization. Julian held the box in his lap for 20 minutes, just staring at it, debating whether he should toss it, burn it, or finally admit to himself that he wanted to know what she hadn't wanted him to see. Curiosity, a cruel master, one. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to someone named G. Most were short, but not casual. They had that heavy, unfinished tone of things you write at 3 a.m. when you're too cowardly to hit send. Some were typed and printed, others handwritten with ink smudges, as if she'd cried while writing them. But none of them were for him. The earliest entry, dated 14 months prior, hit harder than he expected. He had thought this thing with Garth was recent, a reckless, last-minute betrayal. But this had roots. It had grown in the dark behind every fake smile, every deflected kiss, every "I'm just tired, Julian." And what made it worse was how honest she was in those letters. More honest than she'd ever been with him. She wrote about her dreams, her fears, her future. She talked about them, too. Or rather, how eclipsed she felt by his steady presence. How safe had started to mean invisible. How he loved her like a comfortable cage. And how Garth offered a wild, untamed freedom. That last part crushed him because he did make her his routine, but not out of laziness, out of devotion. He thought consistency was love. He thought waking up early to make her artisanal coffee, buying her the rare, imported cereal she liked, memorizing her meeting schedule. He thought those things mattered. But apparently, being seen wasn't about what he did. It was about how Garth made her feel while doing nothing. And still, some sick part of him searched the letters for anything that hinted she missed him. There was one line, tucked between pages of romantic fantasy and future plans with Garth. Julian's gaze has become too knowing. It makes me feel exposed and perversely alive. He reread that line until he couldn't see it anymore through the blur. Not because she finally admitted the truth, but because it confirmed what he feared most. She knew exactly what she was doing. And she did it anyway. He put everything back in the box, drove it 5 miles out, and meticulously fed it into a paper shredder, then scattered the remnants among fallen leaves in a forgotten park. Not burned, not buried, just gone, like she had left him, without ceremony, without closure. That night, he blocked her number, and for the first time in weeks, he slept without hearing her voice in his head. Julian didn't expect to hear from anyone who knew them. He thought he had vanished too quietly for anyone to notice. But then he received a message from Ria's inseparable shadow, Della Layton. Someone he always assumed was in on the lie. Della and Ria were glued together like conspirators, always whispering in corners and exchanging knowing glances when he walked into the room. He had written her off, but her message was short, unexpected, and it sent a tremor through the carefully constructed calm he'd built. "Julian, I didn't know it was this bad. Can we talk?" He didn't answer at first. What was the point? But she sent another text, then another, each one sounding less rehearsed, less like someone trying to cover for Ria, and more like someone trying to confess something she had buried for too long. Against his better judgment, he agreed to meet her at a quiet gallery cafe in the next town over. He sat by the window, watching every car that pulled into the lot, second-guessing why he'd even said yes. When Della walked in, her usual vibrant energy was dimmed, replaced by a subtle tremor in her hands. She sat down, her shoulders slumped, and didn't even order anything. She looked him in the eye and said, I think she started seeing him before your idyllic summer escape to the Italian Lakes District. Julian froze. The anniversary trip. That weekend in Lake Como when he thought they'd reconnected, when she held his hand by the fire pit and, with tears in her eyes, had whispered, You're everything, Julian. He remembered the tears in his own eyes, the way he believed her. But according to Della, Garth had already been in the picture. And worse, Rhea had been texting him from a secluded alcove in the hotel lounge while Julian was out buying artisanal gelato. Della only knew because she accidentally saw the name pop up when Rhea left her phone face up. She hadn't said anything then, said it wasn't her place. But now, with Julian gone and Rhea spiraling, Della felt the crushing weight of it all. Is there any truth that's too painful to hear? She lied to you so easily, Della said quietly. I didn't know she was capable of it. But the way she talked about you, Julian, it was cruel. That word landed like a hammer. Cruel. Not careless, not confused. Cruel because she knew what he'd given up for her. The coveted academic fellowship he'd declined because she didn't want to move. The friends he'd stopped seeing because she didn't like how they made him laugh too loudly. The parts of himself he'd dulled down, his spontaneous humor, his adventurous spirit, to be what she said she needed. Calmer, quieter, more secure. And now he was hearing from her own best friend that none of it mattered. Not to Rhea, not even a little. Della offered to tell Rhea he knew, to confront her, to be the one who blew it all up. But Julian shook his head. I don't want revenge, he said, his voice steady now. I just want out of the story she's still trying to tell. Della nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe she'd been living in her own version of Rhea's fiction, too. As they stood to leave, she pushed a slender, brushed metal flash drive across the table. I don't know if you want it, she said, but I think you deserve to know how far it went. Julian didn't open it that night. He wasn't ready, but deep down, he knew he would. He waited 3 days before he plugged the flash drive into his laptop. 3 days of pacing around the tiny rental apartment, trying to convince himself that he didn't need to see it, that nothing on that drive could give him back what he'd lost, that he was already free, or at least learning how to be. But curiosity, with its sharp edges, pokes at you when everything else goes quiet. The screen lit up. 3 folders. One labeled Aspen Summit, another named Our Life, the third just Garth. He opened Aspen Summit. Dozens of photos. Rhea and Garth laughing in matching designer ski gear. Toasting champagne on a hotel balcony. A mirror selfie in a room with rose petals on the bed. The very same weekend, she told him she was going to spa with Della. His hand clenched the mouse until his knuckles went white, but he kept clicking. He needed to get to the end of it, to burn it all into his memory, so he'd never be tempted to rewrite history. The last folder, Garth, was full of videos not explicit, not graphic, but worse in some insidious way. Her voice, her laughter, her talking to him about Julian, mocking his habits, repeating his words like punchlines, saying how she felt like a widow living with a man who wasn't dead yet. That line stayed with him, twisting like a knife. He closed the laptop, sat in the dark, and then he let it go. He deleted the folders, ejected the flash drive, snapped it in half. No drama, no final message to her, no carefully composed takedown post on social media. He just let it end because he realized something profound. He didn't want closure from her. He wanted clarity from himself. And the truth was, he didn't mourn Rhea. He mourned the ghost of the woman he'd loved, the mirage he'd so desperately clung to. He missed the version of himself who still believed people meant it when they said forever. But maybe forever isn't about holding on. Maybe it's about knowing when to release something that's already gone. 2 months later, Julian moved to a new coastal town, where the sea breeze promised new beginnings. He started fresh. He got a job at a small architectural firm where no one knew his name or his past. He picked up old hobbies, reignited his passion for vintage photography, started long-distance cycling, and slowly he began to recognize himself again. Not the man she broke, but the man he used to be before he shrank to fit into her life. One morning, he opened his front door and found a small package. No name, no note, just a slim, leather-bound volume titled The Art of Solitude and Strength. Inside was a pressed autumn leaf serving as a bookmark. On its underside, a single, elegant script, Peace. He didn't know if it was from her, perhaps Della, maybe someone else entirely. But it didn't matter, because he wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. He had already forgiven the one person who mattered, himself. What truth about yourself will you finally embrace today?